Hello and welcome to the walkthrough for my fifth CQ Code Review Challenge. My name is Florian Walter, and in this video I'll show you an XXE vulnerability, how to spot it in the code, how to exploit it, and then how to remediate it. So since this is Java, the code snippet here is a bit larger than usually. So in the beginning we have some imports, which isn't too interesting for us right now. Then we have an index route, which just sends back a string greetings from Spring Boot, which is just for testing. And then we have another route, post process, which takes in an input XML. And this is very interesting because this is passed in by the user, meaning that it's attacker controlled. So input XML needs to not be null, otherwise we return. And then we can see that the document builder factory is initialized. And we can see that this input XML here is converted to a string reader, converted to an input source, and then passed. So what does that mean? That means we get in an XML string from the user. Again, this is attacker controlled, right? Then we pass this to an XML document. And then in the end, we just call this XML to string, which takes that XML document, converts it back to a string, and sends it as the response for the process route. And since an XML string is passed directly into an XML parser, this is something we'd always like to take a closer look at from a secure code review point of view, because this could always be vulnerable to XXE if the XML parser is not configured securely. So I know from personal experience that the document builder factory in Java is per default not configured securely. But how could you find this out? Well, it's pretty easy. Let's get our browser out and go to the OWASP XXE cheat sheet. So this is a fantastic resource. And back when I was still an application security consultant, I would always simply cite this cheat sheet whenever talking about XXE. Okay, so in here, let's search for document builder factory. And then what it shows us is how to make the document builder factory secure, right? So it gives us a few different scenarios, and I will come back to this a bit later. But for now, let's just keep in mind that the document builder factory in Java is per default vulnerable to XXE. So if we go back into the source code, what exactly does this mean? It means that we found input XML, which is attacker controlled, which is then passed into an XML parser. And we also know that the XML parser is by default not configured securely. So that looks like, just from looking at the source code, that we've identified an XXE vulnerability. So now let's look into the actual exploitation. So for that, we're going to use Burp Suite. And what we want to do is we want to talk to this post process endpoint, right? So we're going to send a request to post process, and we provide this input XML variable here. And what we do is we just put in the classic XXE injection payload, right? So if we just decode this real quick, we will see that this is just a normal XXE payload, right? So we have a doc type and an entity, and we configure it to be a system file, the XXE password file to be precise. And then we render this within the body of the XML file, right? So it's just the normal XXE exploitation payload if you Google for it or ask ChatGPT. And if we look back into repeater, we can see that if we send this, we get the content of the XXE password file. So everything's working, and we found a local file inclusion vulnerability that allows us to extract any file from that Linux machine. And that's, of course, a very critical vulnerability. And the next step would be, for example, trying to extract the source code files for that application in hope of finding more vulnerabilities. trying to extract, if we can, SSH keys. So depending on the permissions that the user running this application has, we might be able to extract files from the root folder, right? Like maybe the SSH key of the root, or maybe we can, based on the etc password file, identify other users and try to extract SSH keys from their home directories, right? So that's another common exploitation scenario. Or we could just look in other locations trying to find credentials. Okay, so now that we figured out how to exploit this XXE vulnerability, let's see how we can fix it. How can we change the source code to make it secure? And for that, let's go back into our web browser and go back to this cheat sheet here. So this is the XXE OWASP cheat sheet. And again, it's a fantastic resource. So I'm a fan of all these cheat sheets. And actually, if I remember correctly, I'm even a contributor for this XXE cheat sheet here and the cross-site scripting cheat sheet. So yeah, they're fantastic resources. Feel free to check them out. Feel free to contribute if you have anything to add, right? But let's just talk about the document builder factory for now. So this code here shows us exactly how to make it secure. So we instantiate a new document builder factory, and then it says this is the primary defense. And what we do is we set this feature, disallow doc type declarations, and we set it to true. And what this does is, remember if we go back to the payload, so this payload, we'll check it out URL unencoded again, we can see that we use a doc type for the etc passability file to sort of render it in the XML, right? But without any doc types, so if we don't allow doc types, then this wouldn't be possible anymore. So disabling doc types is the primary defense. However, sometimes this may not be possible, in which case if you can't completely disable doc types, there are other ways where you can specifically still disable the more insecure parts of doc types, such as external general entities and external parameter entities. On top of disabling doc types, there's something else we can or we should do, which is set x includes aware to false. So the last time I checked the Java documentation a while ago, this was set to false by default. So it's not like super urgent to set it, so to speak. However, it's still always a good idea, even if the default is secure, it's still a good idea to be as explicit as possible with security. So we may still want to explicitly set this to false. And just so for your information, so X includes is not a feature that I've ever used as a developer, but I checked it out as a security person. And it's just another way to render files on an XML without using doc types, meaning if that was set to true, that would open a totally different avenue to allow an attacker to achieve local file inclusion using a malicious XML file. Okay, now that we've talked about this, let's jump into our source code and make the code secure using the recommendations by the OWASP XXE cheat sheet. Okay, so let's get this feature here and let's... Okay, so DBF set feature, that looks good. And we also said we want it to be as explicit as possible with security features. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording real quick. I'm going to redeploy the Docker image, and then we just dive straight into it again and see if we're able to remediate the XXE vulnerability now. Okay, so I had a little syntax error. So I had this feature, but it didn't specify that it was a string. So I added this in, redeployed the Docker image, and it's running now. So let's go back into the burp suite. And we can see now that if we send our XXE injection payload, then we get an error saying doc type is allowed when the feature disallow doc type declarations is set to true. So that's really good, right? So that looks like we can no longer inject the XXE payload. But now I'm wondering if the app is still working as intended, right? So if you remember, post process takes in an import XML as a string, passes it to an XML file, and then converts it back to a string and sends it back. So this obviously doesn't make too much sense, but it's just a proof of concept, right? Just a testing application to play around with XXE. So let's see if the functionality itself is still working. So if you just pass in a random XML file, we see that we get sent it back as an XML string. So we pass it an XML and we get the XML back as XML string. So that looks really good. It looks like the intended functionality is still working. However, XXE itself is no longer possible. So looks like we successfully made this code secure now without having any issues with the designed functionality, right? Yeah, that's everything I have to say for this XXE vulnerability. So yeah, if you have any feedback from me, please feel free to comment it on the YouTube video or let me know on LinkedIn. And if you want more of this type of content, please feel free to like and subscribe. And yeah, until next time. Bye.